We've had this garden about 8 years, and we actually rent it from the Education Authority. Previously, it was the kitchen garden of the house which belonged to the Meakin family, Meakins the Potters. And now the building is used by the Education Authority as a school for boys who are actually excluded from mainstream education. They come through this garden on their way to get on the minibuses and get their bikes to go cycling and to go swimming and so on. And I like to think that, well, they say that it actually gives them a good feeling to walk through it. When we actually took it over, there was nothing here, and it was covered in snow. There was an advertisement in the paper which said Victorian walled kitchen garden to rent. So Colin and I went to the school and got on rather well with the headmaster, who was frightfully keen on rugby. And before we knew where we were, we'd agreed to take the garden on. So from that time, it's evolved. There wasn't any plan. It's just like topsy, it grew. And at the beginning, we used to travel probably hundreds of miles to get to the rarer herbs and plants. But the more common things people gave us, and I've propagated just by my best method of all is sticking things in the ground. On the whole, that works very satisfactorily. Now, the thing about having too many in this garden is that people might say that we have too many weeds, but the advantage of it being a herb garden is that quite simply a lot of so-called weeds are actually really, really wonderful herbs. So for example, take this one here. This is figwort, and most people would have pulled it up, but it's an incredibly valuable medicinal herb. Its botanical name is Scrophularia, but so it's one of its medicinal uses. It has about 8, as most of these plants have. For example, let me just divert onto this one, which is American pokeroot or pokeweed. This is actually being investigated at the moment for the treatment of AIDS. It's extremely poisonous. These little flowers will turn into black berries in time, but it's a really valuable plant. Back to this Scrophularia or figwort. Scrofula is called the king's evil, and is a huge problem with tumours of the glands, and so this is really valuable. Now, another point about these weeds is that on the whole they're British native, and you can see the hoverflies, and very often wild bees are getting nectar from these little flowers. They seem to prefer the little ones, and especially the simple ones, and obviously are not really interested in foreign imported exotic ones. Now the geraniums, we've got too many geraniums, but they're also a herb. They're an important medicinal herb, and they act as ground cover. This wonderful Angelica is called Angelica archangelica. That's its botanical name, and the folklore is that the Archangel Michael appeared to people at the beginning of the Middle Ages and in a vision, and he told them that Angelica was the cure for the plague and an incredible amount of illnesses. And so they really believed it, and it was widely used. Still used medicinally, but to a lesser extent. And of course we all know that it's crystallised and used in food. preparation. Now, if we're talking about weeds, really this plant here is a weed, but its other name is woundwort. And again, it's a native plant, and the bees and the hoverflies really love it. And because of its name, you can tell that it's an important healing herb. Now, some people would regard mint not exactly as a weed, but it shouldn't have free range in the garden because it has all these runners which go underneath the ground. Here there are about at least 4 different kinds. I like this furry one, and this is rather a rare one. This is variegated buddleia mint. This is handsome and well known, the spearmint, which is good as a digestive, and then of course it's used in after eights and mint chocolates. Now, oh, the smell, that was really, really lovely. It released its lovely scent, which sadly, on the whole, I can't appreciate because I don't seem to have a very good sense of smell, so that means it was even stronger. This is a mallow, and these have the propensity to seed themselves around, but I don't mind too much because they're very pretty. There are some over there in the path which have put themselves there, very naughtily really, because they're not supposed to be there. But foxgloves too, they're of course an important herb, not exactly that one, which is the common foxglove, but one called lanata, which is a source of digitalin, the heart drug. This is an interesting plant, actually called meadowsweet, and it was the favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. She used it as a strewing herb, but also the flowers are edible and could be used in drinks. Now, originally this was called spirea, but now it's called Filipendula ulmaria. They discovered that it contains salicylic acid, which of course is the constituent of aspirin, and this is how aspirin got its name, from meadowsweet when it was still called spirea. The thing I should mention here about herbal medicines is, in the first place, they're likely to be very dangerous, so it's not advisable to self-administer, but at the same time they are considered to be so very beneficial because on the whole they don't have the side effects that synthetic drugs do. I'm just taking off the bits which have already flowered. Now this comfrey is one of about, I think I've got at least 6 different kinds, and such a wonderful healing herb. Its other name is knitbone, and they thought in the past, somebody, one of the old herbalists, said that if you got a pan with some water in it and put 2 bones in it with some comfrey and boiled them up, the 2 bones would join together. I think that's really a little bit too far-fetched, but it has absolute potent powers of healing wounds and broken limbs. Marigold, well, it's not out yet, but marigold, its name comes from Mary's gold, the Virgin Mary, of course. Calendula is a very, very, very healing herb and has many uses. The petals are edible, and so you can put them in your salads. And you can make a wonderful soothing skin cream with the flowers. Reverting to weeds again, here's an example of what not to do. This variegated plant is actually ground elder, and it started off as an innocent little clump and has extended to this. Now, in actual fact, its other name is goutweed, so it's really got a place in a herb garden. And although I intend to control it a bit more, it lightens up this patch. This has got so much folklore attached to it. It's Artemisia abrotanum, or southernwood. It's also known as lad's love, and it's actually antiseptic. It was used at the time of the plague with the thyme and and rosemary, certain other antiseptic herbs, to try to counteract the bacteria which spread it. It was also used in courts to protect the judges from jail fever, which was prevalent. And even at the beginning of the last century, pieces of this, together with the rue, were placed, not the last century, century before, Victorian times, were placed on the benches in the courtrooms when judges went to hear the prisoners read their case. This is wild basil, just such a delicate little fragrant herb which has put itself here. It's on the wrong side of the path. I mean, it's on the wrong side of the bed. It's actually growing in the path. But it's rather nice because when people walk along here, especially the boys, they brush against these plants and release the aroma, which I hope will be healing and soothing to them. Lavender, this one, certainly is soothing and is used for aromatherapy and can be used in pillows to help people to sleep. It also calms nerves before exams and soothes tension. Some of the plants I have are variations of British native. So this one here is a dark form of cow parsley. It's called Raven's Wing, which is a rather lovely name because of its dark colours and leaves. Now, here we have a very romantic plant, which I've grown from a cutting. And in Tudor times, it was known as a clove gillyflower. They absolutely adored these. They virtually worshipped them. They wore them. They ate them, because you can pull the petal out. You have to take that white bit off, which is bitter. And then you can sprinkle it in your salads, on your trifles, or whatever. And they also pickled them for use in the winter because they thought that they were so important. They also believed in their healing properties, which they've actually been proven to have. There are some interesting plants here. Oh, first of all, look, the marigold in flower. Now this plant here is white melilot, and although at the moment it doesn't look anything, in about a month's time it will be much taller with feathery white flowers which last for a very long time. It's a member of the clover family, and it's really important medicinal herb and is actually used in the treatment of cancer. This angelica has seeded itself here. It's got one here, one there, and one in the path. And this is rue, which I mentioned in connection with the Artemisia as being used against the plague, to counteract the plague and yellow fever. It's a really important healing plant, but it's also a very bitter edible plant which is used to be eaten by the ancient Greeks, is still nowadays eaten by the Italians, but just a tiny amount. People think that it's poisonous because it does have an element of danger about it, but it isn't that it's poisonous. It's just that it's sap. If you get its milky sap on your skin and then the sun shines on that place, a blister comes up. And I actually I rather suspect that that is a result of what I've just said. This delightful feathery Artemisia, this too is an Artemisia, like the southernwood, is called Artemisia pontica, or Roman wormwood. And every time I look at it, I have to smile, because I got it from a wonderful herb garden in Wiltshire, which is called Malmesbury Abbey, where the couple who own it and have this absolutely magnificent garden, it featured on Gardener's World for an entire hour, and even then they didn't show the herb garden. Now I have to tell you about this couple who own this garden. They have a very curious way of dressing, or rather not dressing, and they like to wear as little as possible. And when I'd made an arrangement to visit over the telephone, when I actually arrived, I rang the front doorbell. I had my tussie mussy, that is a little posy of herbs and flowers, to present to the owner of the garden. And when she opened the door, I could not believe my eyes. I nearly dropped it, because she was entirely clad in black leather with the briefest of shorts you could possibly imagine. And husband too was similarly attired. He didn't wear leather. I don't know what he had, sort of swimming trunks. However, that's another story. But you see how the association of ideas enhances the appreciation of the garden. I see that this, which was cut down entirely about a couple of months ago, has got little flower buds on it. It's a wonderful doer and will completely fill this bare patch of wall. It's a clematis called Mary Rose. It's double, it's purple in colour, a bit like this purple sage, and quite small, and was mentioned by Gerard 400 years ago, so it's got a very historic pedigree. This is purple sage. It's completely edible, and they're doing experiments at the moment with sage to see if it helps to counteract the effect of Alzheimer's. because the whole thing about sage, the name itself, is to do with wisdom, and it's actually known to stimulate the brain. This is a salvia. It's such a vast family. It's got at least 500 different ones within the genus. And here is a really, really attractive one that isn't generally known. It's called Bergarten, which simply means mountain garden. I think Berg probably means mountain. Yeah. So this means mountain garden, and it's just grown for its leaves. It is actually edible. It smells rather strong, but it looks wonderful when it's covered in dew or rain, misty rain. This plant is a salvia as well. This is Salvia scleria turkistanica, but its common name is Sweaty Betty. It has an oil in it which just smells like underarms, untreated underarms. However, it's such a shame because it's such a pretty flower. It has medicinal uses, of course. This tree, which is only a baby as it grows to 200 feet, is called the maidenhair tree, or Ginkgo biloba. It's just such an important drug nowadays. Apparently it's particularly popular in Germany. But its function is to aid blood vessels, to keep them working properly, and hence its use for short-term memory loss. My husband takes it, and every day he's got this silly joke which says, "Oh dear, I've forgotten to take my Ginkgo biloba." This feathery leafed plant I'm really, really thrilled about, because I put it in last year and didn't expect it to come through the winter, but it has. It's a type of fennel, but it's a very exotic one and not normally grown in this country. It's grown in the Middle East and India, and it's called Ferula asafoetida. Its common name is devil's dung, which describes, together with Sweaty Betty, devil's dung is very, very malodorous. In its country of origin, it grows to a much bigger plant. When it begins to flower, they cut off the top, and a juice or resin exudes from the root, which hardens on contact with the air. Then the resin is used in medicines, and also it becomes a spice. When it's ground down, it's got another name, and it's called food of the gods, because it tastes absolutely wonderful in Indian cookery. Well, in any cookery, but it's mainly used in Indian vegetable dishes. This small plant, which looks like a rose, is actually licorice. And again, this has come through the winter, much to my delight and amazement. Now, of course, it grows in Pontefract, and there was a huge industry in Victorian times, and until fairly recently, when they made Pontefract cakes. And licorice has got medicinal properties and medicinal uses, and actually it's being revived now. It's becoming more popular again, because we find this, what goes round comes round, and violets are a good example of that. They also are becoming very fashionable. In Victorian times they were, and they were widely grown in Devon and transported by train to London every week, where Eliza Doolittle and her colleagues would sell them in Covent Garden. But that whole industry is being revived now, and there are violet nurseries in Devon. This delicate little plant is called Codonopsis, and it's exquisite inside. The bees like it, as you can see, but it has got the most extraordinary and revolting smell. And one visitor to the garden remarked she thought it was even more sweaty than Betty. But another plant with a lovely, interesting history is this one here, which is a sea holly or eryngium. As you can see, the bees love it. And at one stage last year, it was covered in orange beetles, those slender beetles that they call bloodsuckers. Now, in the 18th century, it was considered to be an aphrodisiac, and people candied the roots, which were known as eringos. Gentlemen carried them around in their pockets in tins, and when they saw a nice woman they fancied, they would offer her one. Sadly, we don't know if they were effective, but it makes a nice story, and it's certainly a beautiful plant. Of course, it has healing properties. I've spoken a little bit about the folklore and legends connected with herbs. Of course, they were used in magic potions, and many people in the past, I suppose really I would have been burnt as a witch or certainly persecuted, which seems really sad when herbs are healing and helpful subjects.